lads, ladies, gents, ladetts, whoever, whatever, welcome back to another video. Before we jump into it, I wanted to let you know this video is brought to you by the team at Cross Circle Squared, your one-stop shop for gaming news, reviews, and everything in between. I just so happen to be a contributor to that channel, so this video is brought to you by me. Anyway, it probably won't come as any shock that I am a huge sci-fi and horror nerd. Hell, I have multiple speedruns of the Resident Evil games on my channel. Not that I'm any good, but horror games tend to be some of my absolute favorites, as typically they'll have a good level of challenge and some interesting gameplay mechanics, along with different and interesting narrative decisions. So it'll come as no surprise that one of my absolute favorite horror series of all time is Dead Space. Developed by Visceral Games and published by the real horror of the gaming industry, EA, Dead Space became a staple in any horror gaming fan's collection in late 2008. Releasing to mass praise amongst gamers and critics alike, it went on to sell over 2 million copies, and even in 2023, it went on to receive a remake that is arguably amongst, if not the single best remake of all time to date. So throughout the video, we'll bounce between footage of the old and new for your viewing pleasure. Taking place in 2508 after the Earth has died, Dead Space follows engineer Isaac Clarke, who works for the Concordance Extraction Corporation, who, along with a crew, heads up to the USG Ishimura for emergency maintenance, only to upon arrival have everything go crazy. This isn't Isaac's only reason for being here, however, as he wanted to see his partner Nicole and sort things out after a really bad argument between the two. More on their relationship in a little bit, because I wanted to comment about something that I think only a small group of people have complained about, but they're pretty damn loud when it comes to their online voice. And that's the character model changes for Isaac and Nicole. Though I personally prefer the old character model for Isaac, his new model is no eyesore, and as for Nicole, given the fact she's meant to be near 40 by the time this takes place, it would only make sense that, you know, she looks like she's close to 40. It's also important to note it's the same actress who played Nicole in Dead Space 2. This is like the Spider-Man 2 thing with MJ. Some people refused to believe that it was the same actress and complained about it. How stupid can you be? To get back on track, as shit has hit the proverbial fan, it's up to Isaac and the other remaining survivors to make their way off Ishimura and get out of hell. On this journey, we'll find out about an evil entity only known as the Marker. Now, if you've never played Dead Space, the Marker has so much lore behind it, and with there being so much to talk about, I could spend a good couple hours trying to explain everything and still miss a ton of information. So I'm going to do my best to summarize and make it all make sense, but do forgive me if I miss a lot of information. Essentially, there are two types of markers, black and red. Red is what we run into in Dead Space 1, and these are reverse engineered versions of black markers, with them essentially being the same thing. Black markers are believed to have been sent out by brethren moons to planets in order to begin what is known as the convergence. This is where a marker will transform the dead into Necromorphs, the main enemy of the series. Once there is enough Necromorphs and the conditions are met for the convergence, all the Necromorphs will surround the marker as it essentially takes over the planet, consuming it, and then becoming what is known as a blood moon, connecting it to the other brethren moons, creating a network of Necromorphs throughout the universe. To compare it to something in real life, it's like a virus, but instead of going from one person to another, this shit goes planet to planet. There is a crapload more to go into here, but that's for another time. Getting back to Isaac, you think he'd be the classic sci-fi gung-ho hero, ready to save the universe. However, Isaac is a reluctant hero, someone you'll sympathize with. He's no Arnold Schwarzenegger. He isn't some super strong, muscle-bound sharpshooter. Sure, he gets a lot more brave as the game goes on, but for the most part, he's nervous, anxious, scared, and just as confused as anyone would be in his situation. Isaac finds himself relying on others to help him survive and motivate himself to keep going, as he's more likely to do things for others than himself. The reason I say this is because with his search for Nicole, you'll learn about what the marker has been doing to him throughout the entire game, which sets up for a good twist, because even though it does give Isaac a reason to just give up, he doesn't. He continues to fight for those around him. And now for a spoiler warning, as I want to talk about Isaac, Nicole, the marker, and that twist. I know I've already talked about some of the lore, but this will probably ruin the story for you if you have never experienced it, so please skip to the timestamp shown on screen. To continue getting into Isaac's character, at least from my perspective, you'll notice every time when he interacts with Nicole throughout the game, it's almost like he sounds guilty or unsure, as if the logical part of his brain is saying, you know she is dead, let her go, while the emotional part is holding out hope that he would be wrong. Another example of this story beat is in Sony's Days Gone, where Deacon knows he should accept that his wife is dead after the zombies overran the city and they got separated. This leads to conflict within our lead character, and I will say Dead Space probably does it better than Days Gone by a country mile. The fact that Dead Space doesn't have a happy ending makes the ending way more impactful, and it makes the subtle clues in the way Isaac is portrayed become infinitely more important to the overall narrative. It's honestly astounding how well written and acted Isaac actually is. He's a guy trying to do the right thing, wanting that happy ending, knowing the world he lives in has gone to shit. Yet, even though he knows the outcome, he persists and pushes through the hard times. So overall, I think he's a wonderful character, and I don't think the story has anywhere near the impact it does without him. And speaking of impact, this game's environmental storytelling will leave you with one, as Dead Space has some of the best of all time. It's not to say it's without its faults, as I do think there are a couple spots where it does drop the ball. Firstly, the introduction of the Necromorphs. I think they could have done better to have left this for another 5 minutes or so and let the environment actually tell the story of what's going on. Not that the introduction of the Necromorph is inherently bad, but I do think it could have been done slightly better. It's still scary as hell. I know this is just randomly in here, but she decided she wanted to cuddle while I'm trying to record, so enjoy. Secondly, cut off the limbs. Brilliant. Yes. However, 30 seconds after seeing that on the wall, you get a call just telling you to do it anyway. I think it would have been better to have just left it to the player to figure out on their own. No one here knew what they were getting into, so why do we need to be told everything right now? This doesn't ruin the flow of the game or everyone's favorite word, immersion, but I do think it's something that they had an opportunity to fix in the remaster and they just never did. But these complaints are nothing when it comes to talking about the rest of this game, because its environmental storytelling, especially when it comes to the Ishimura itself, is just absolute perfection. The Ishimura is more than just a spaceship. It is more than just a level that we traverse. It is an extension of the Necromorphs themselves, an extension of the marker. It gives them darkness to hide in, vents to crawl around in and sneak up on us from behind. It gives them everything they need to be as terrifying as possible. It makes the Ishimura basically a character within the game. And as you make your way through the Ishimura, you'll find yourself navigating down corridor after corridor, creating a sense of claustrophobia the likes only the original Resident Evil ever made me feel. However, unlike its old school counterpart, Dead Space is more in line with Resi 1's younger sibling, Resident Evil 4, with both being a little more heavy on the action side of things, more so than just being straight up survival horror. It's not to say you couldn't count Dead Space as survival horror, but I don't think you're going to run out of ammo anytime soon unless you're just a terrible shot like myself, but even then, I rarely ever run out. Not to say that you won't run out, but odds are you will be fine. Especially because you'll find yourself swapping between the 6 main weapons you get to pick from, and each of these guns feel pretty damn unique, and all have alternate fire modes, giving them a lot of utility. As a couple of examples, the plasma cutter can either shoot in a vertical or horizontal line, which can help in cutting off certain enemy limbs. The pulse rifle can use up to 25 ammo in order to shoot out a grenade that will basically one-tap most enemies. However, it can be pretty useful when you're fighting 2 Necromorphs at once and you want them to both just be gone. On top of these weapons, Isaac gets access to different suits that he can buy at the shop to get access to more protection. All the weapons and armor can be upgraded at workbenches that are scattered throughout the Ishimura. This is done using power nodes that we insert into them. However, this is where Dead Space Original and Remake differ quite heavily, as in the original you would have to decide whether to use power nodes in order to get into certain locations to get more ammo versus upgrades. And compared to Remake, where the upgrade nodes are right next to each other on our weapons and armor, we actually have some spots in Original where you would just have to put a node into a blank space. This made the upgrades in the original feel a lot more hefty, even though functionally they're the same. To give the combat a little bit more depth than it already has, we get access to 2 special abilities which we unlock relatively early on in Isaac's journey, that being the Stasis module and the Kinesis module. Though mostly being used for the in-game puzzles and exploration, we can use both of these when it comes to combat. The Stasis module allows us to slow down things, including enemies, and if you've upgraded it enough, you'll slow down multiple enemies as long as they're next to each other. Furthermore, the Kinesis module allows you to pick up objects and throw them with extreme force in order to kill enemies. You can use it to actually pick up things like exploding barrels, pipes, even enemy limbs in order to defend yourself, especially useful when you don't have any ammo. Not enough in-depth combat for you? Well, we have a few more actions we can take. Firstly, we have the absolute monster of a haymaker that Isaac throws. It doesn't really do a hell of a lot of damage, but damn, it looks cool. Secondly, we've got arguably the coolest thing in the game, the Stomp. The Stomp, which isn't typically used in combat, is mostly used after combat in order to stomp on enemies to get ammo or credits, as well as other items. You can also use the Stomp to break boxes that you find throughout the Ishimura in order to hopefully get new items, ammo, or credits as well. And considering Dead Space is a horror game, you can always do the reliable action of running away, in which you'll notice Isaac isn't the fastest or most agile character you'll ever control. Though he doesn't feel like a tank, he does struggle a little bit with some of those tight 90-degree corners that you'll find yourself running into time and time again. It really helps perpetuate the overall sense of dread as you might be running out of items, haven't saved in a while, or are just trying to conserve ammo. There are sections of the game that have you exploring with no oxygen, which helps really instill more of this anxiety that the game is trying to put into you. On top of that, there are also places that have zero gravity, and although a little bit janky, I think it's a really solid implementation of what they're trying to do. And what is arguably one of the coolest attention to details in Dead Space is when you go into the zero oxygen locations. Sounds are highly muffled and barely exist, thus using silence as another way to instill horror and anxiety in its player base. Somehow, I wouldn't even say it's the best thing about the sound design in Dead Space. If you're paying attention as you make your way through, you'll just hear tons of ambient sounds. These make you paranoid as all hell. It's like being at home in the middle of the night, hearing sounds of the fridge starting up, or the creaks and cracks of floorboards, the wind rustling the windows. It's brilliant. Dead Space takes that and absolutely runs with it. You'll hear monsters yelling and screaming, yet none of them are actually next to you, but it feels like they're only a couple rooms away and they could come to get you at any time. Speaking of which, you'll hear them crawling around in the vents, and some of these vents will start to speed up and overload and just scare the crap out of you whenever they can. Dead Space just doesn't want you to feel safe. The only time in which you do feel safe is when you're on the tram, and that's about it. Adding to this absolute feeling of dread that Dead Space makes you feel is its soundtrack. It is chaotic as hell. It is not something you will go out of your way to listen to as an individual song. However, if you hear it in conjunction with the horror that is Dead Space, holy crap does it work. You couldn't have made a more perfect soundtrack, and the team behind it, led by Jason Graves, deserves all the credit in the world. So up to this point, I've been pretty damn positive about this game, and do you think that I'm going to complain? No, because I actually have more positives. The game's hard. I haven't talked about it up until this point. I wanted to give it its own section, because this is the most perfect game heads-up display of any game in history, and no one can tell me otherwise. It is built into the core game itself. It is part of that environmental storytelling. It serves a purpose. It is not just a health bar. It's not just an ammo count. It's not just an inventory. Everything makes sense and is done deliberately to build the world of Dead Space. It made everything believable within this universe, and Visceral have created arguably the greatest sci-fi horror game in history, only to have EA ruin it later, but that's a story for another day. So with that, lads, ladies, gents, ladetts, whoever, whatever, it brings us to the end of another video. I hope you enjoyed this look back at Dead Space, and I hope you hate EA as much as I do. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting that like button. If you want to go that extra step, you can hit the subscribe button. If you want to go that extra mile, you can support me on Ko-fi from just $1 a month, like these lovely people here. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay safe out there. Bye.